Dear listeners, welcome at this episode in the fourth season of Meet the Expert podcast series. And in this series, together with well-known experts from around the globe, we explore challenges and opportunities in the pig veterinary world. In this episode, we take a trip down the road of pig economics, and we do so with a very well-known name in the industry, being Robert Hoste, attached to Wageningen Economic Research, part of Wageningen University Research, based in the Netherlands. In total, we shall be speaking to him twice this series, as we will also discuss the topic of sustainability and how to make that profitable. But that's for the next episode. For now, the focus shall be on pig production worldwide. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Vincent.
The Meet the Expert series is a co-production of Boehringer-Ingelheim and Pig Progress. And my name is Vincent de Beek. I'm editor of Pig Progress and I shall be the host of today's episode. And present at this podcast is also audio-visual editor Iris Hofman, without whom this podcast wouldn't be possible. Our guest, Robert Hoste, is a senior pig production economist at Wageningen Economic Research in the Netherlands, and he has over 30 years of experience in economic issues on farm and sector level, as well as in supply chain cooperation and international studies. He has a wide network in the industry in the Netherlands as well as worldwide. And as of 2014, he has also been involved in several projects in South Korea, aiming to improve performance and efficiency of pig farm management. As said, today's focus will be at pig production worldwide. But let me just start a little bit, because I just introduced you, Robert, and explained that you have more than 30 years of experience in the economic issues in pig production. What makes pig production more interesting for you than, for instance, the dairy, the feed or the poultry markets?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. To be honest, I'm not really involved in the other sectors, so making a comparison is a bit complicated. But at least I was diving into the pig sector based on some experiences in a young age, some 10 years old. I remember a farm visit where there were live pigs running outside, etc. So it was really fascinating to me. And so I started to be involved in this pig farming, pig sector, and I expanded my experience, let's say, in supply chains, in international scope. So how are pigs kept in other countries? So all in all, this is a fascinating sector. It's really nice to be involved in it.
Yeah, it started very early then, if I hear you well. And what has kept this market so fascinating for you that you kind of kept being enchanted by it for so long?
Yeah, that's a good question. My children, for example, they also say, well, what is so interesting in these pigs? Isn't it dull in the end? No, it's not dull, because there's always a changing situation, new interesting topics, animal welfare is popping up, or antibiotics issues, or how do supply chains cooperate? All these issues are coming up and new questions arise, and then the government is asking questions. So how should we set up this new nitrogen policy in the Netherlands? So the pigs are the same, but the topics around are always changing. And that's fascinating.
Oh, yeah, no, true. I think probably most of our listeners will recognize some aspects of that, because most of our listeners will also be involved in swine production. Okay, let us take a look at today's topic. We're going to talk about the large players in the swine world. I don't think it's rocket science that we'll be ending up to talk about, for instance, China, the US, Brazil, and the European Union. Shall we just take a deep dive into all of them and just discuss them bit by bit? For instance, largest producer in the world is China. That's common knowledge for now. If you had to kind of describe that market in a nutshell, what are we looking at?
Well, the pig sector, the pig production in China is, first of all, it's the largest producer. It's close to half of all the pigs are living in China. What we see there is an increasing scale of production, where backyards are closing on one hand, and the other hand, we see the large integrations with modern day production. And China wants to be self-providing, self-sufficient in pigs, more or less self-sufficient. So they have to have modern day production, and it should be at a low cost, because consumers have to pay for it. And pig meat is very important in the Chinese culture, in the Chinese kitchen, but also in the wallet, because pig meat is the most important product for economists to calculate the inflation ratio, let's say. So pig meat is really important. And as there was African swine fever during the 2019, let's say, and the years after, there was a very strong reduction in pig production in China, and consumers were complaining because they didn't get their meat. So pig meat is very important in China, and it is now increasingly being produced in integrations with modern management, modern breed, modern feed composition, but also with quite some challenges. Because on one hand, they want to increase and they want to do it now. They want to be very modern, but to have a modern day management and high performance level, you also need a kind of awareness. It's a mindset, which is not in the basis available in China. And they try to learn it from other countries, also from Europe, from the Netherlands, and but it requires not only hardware, so tangible issues like stables or pigs, breeding animals. It also requires software, but it requires also mindware, as I call it. So the awareness of how to deal with biosecurity, with antibiotics, etc. And when it comes to biosecurity, especially the very large companies do invest in biosecurity, but they invest heavily in it and maybe a bit overdone. And now it is for them the challenge to have it in a balanced way. So what is a good biosecurity? Taking care of African swine fever, increasing the awareness among all the farm workers, and the other hand, not to investing too heavy in it.
Yeah, that is the awareness of doing things right goes in both directions. I would understand that you need to do enough, but yeah, if you do too much, you probably still have difficulty grasping exactly what needs to be done.
Yeah, an example. A person from the Netherlands, an industry person, went to a company in China, wanted to be there in the farm, needed to be there, but then it was said, okay, you need 2 days to go through the quarantine. And meanwhile, he was in the canteen, in the canteen where also the employees of the farm entered. So they were meeting each other. So this is not really a quarantine approach. So the mindset of the farm workers at that moment was not really good.
I see. And well, we've heard, just a sidestep, we've heard about these enormous big complexes being built everywhere. I think the news everywhere has been about this project of 26 layers on top of each other. But it's difficult to get real ideas how many of these projects are being built. Do you have any idea of that?
I have no overview of the number of these large integrations, but it is sure that these types of companies will take over the lead in the Chinese market. And it is clear because their cost of production is still higher than it is in Europe. Because of the lower performance and also the lower, animal performance, so technical performance, but also the feed efficiency is lower, and they have to import lots of feeds and other reasons as well. So the cost of production is clearly higher than in Europe, for example. That means that they have to reduce their cost of production, and this can only be done in the companies. We made a cost calculation to compare a family farm in China and one in the Netherlands, and the cost of production, it was summer 2021, by the way, so some time ago already. And the cost of production in Chinese family farm was 80% higher than in the Netherlands, 80. So this is really high. And this is also reflected in the market prices. The market prices in China are clearly higher than in the Netherlands, some €2.5 per kilo carcass weight, let's say, on average. And this is reflecting the cost of production. So the only way to reduce costs and to make it affordable also for consumers is to do it in a modern way, in a an efficient way, and this can only be done in large-scale modern-day production.
I see. So we're most likely going to see more of those developments.
Exactly.
I see. Just a little sidestep as well. They say African swine fever is coming with another wave. Is there anything to be said about that in terms of market prices, or is it too early to say anything about that yet?
It's indeed too early, because the interesting point is that farmers who get aware that ASF popped up again, they are going to sell their pigs, including sows. So the supply of pigs is still okay. And that is also what the Chinese government says. The supply is okay, so no problem. But when they are slaughtering sows and their pig stock actually too early before they are ready to be marketed, then you can just wait a few months and then you see the production dropping.
I see. So that we'll have to wait a little bit before we see the effects of that. Okay, that was China, the major pig producer in the world. What can we say about the United States?
The United States is a stable producer in terms of the size, the volume of pig production. They're growing more or less constant every year, a few percent in the total volume. They have a good feed base in their own country. There are challenges as well in terms of employee availability, and also they are a world exporter, so they are exporting to any country in the world almost, and they are also hit by market closures, by border closures. But there's another problem going on in the US, and that is that they have quite some mortality both in sows and in growing animals. Due to the PRRS going around. So we hear stories of 10%, 20% of mortality among the pigs. And this is what we see also in their total production. It has seen a little reduction due to, these outbreaks, let's say, of PRRS. But generally spoken, they have a good performance. They have own feedstuffs, and they have a good base also in the domestic consumption. And that makes a difference too, if you allow me to make the jump to the next country. That makes a difference with Brazil. Brazil is a very nice country in terms of low-cost production, well organized. They have ample feed supply that's very good, a good export portfolio. They have healthy pigs, but their domestic base is very small. That means that the majority, almost all the meat has to be exported. So the dependence to open markets is very high. The resilience is an issue there. And that is the difference to the USA, where they have a good domestic market, home market, where the consumers take part of the pig meat produced. So when there are market shocks, if a market is closed, then the domestic market can buffer these fluctuations, let's say.
I see. So the US and Brazil both are different from China in the respect that they have plenty of feed sources available, and then the US and Brazil is strongly different because in US they can sell the pork on the domestic market, whereas in Brazil, no, they are more dependent on export.
Oh yes, yeah, more dependent. And the Americas in general have growth promoters like rectopamine. And these are not allowed, not accepted in China or in the EU or also in Russia. So for being able to export to such countries, trade blocs, it is necessary to arrange, to organize vertical supply chains where rectopamine is banned and not used. And it should be shown that it is not used, and only then it is possible to export. And they are doing well. They are well organized, both North and South America, to be able to show this and to export.
Okay. Well, we've had now China, we've just discussed the US, and we've discussed Brazil. Let us go to the EU. That is a fourth block of strong pig production. What can we say about that?
The EU is a federation, let's say, if you may say so, of many countries and many types of production. On one hand, there is quite some backyard production in Romania, for example. On the other hand, there's the very high animal welfare status in Finland. So there's a lot of variety within the EU. But generally spoken, our cost of production in the European Union is high compared to USA, Canada, Brazil, some 30% higher, roughly spoken, due to the high societal demands and the high income level also. Moreover, the requirements are increasing. I refer to the Green Deal policy. This will lead to further restrictions in animal welfare, antibiotics use, but also in how the feed is being produced.
Just a step inside for those people who are not aware with the Green Deal policy. Is it possible to explain that in about 2 or 3 sentences?
The Green Deal policy is a new policy to be further elaborated of European Commission with the focus on increased sustainability, especially focus on planet sustainability. So reducing the burden to the environment in terms of pesticides, manure surpluses, nature conservation, biodiversity, such elements are being addressed in the Green Deal policy. But it should be further elaborated yet. It's not fully clear on what it means, what it will mean in Europe, in European countries.
But do you feel it is a good or a bad development?
Well, that is a political statement of whether it's good or bad, but we have to deal with that in the European Union. And if this means that the difference between Europe on one hand and the rest of the world on the other is growing, then it means that we will further have to focus on EU domestic demand rather than world export. The cost of production will increase, but also we will meet better the demands of the society. So it is just taking off the rest of the world, let's say, making a separation. And that requires that we are reducing the total production and just focus on the European Union ourselves. The current self-sufficiency in Europe amounts to some 120%. So 1 out of 6 kilos is being exported, and it could be further reduced. I would plea for a smart autarky, as I call it. So exporting the offals, the edible offals to countries like China, etc., but further focusing on our own European market.
I see. I think that kind of sums up the situation in the European Union. Several European Union countries are suffering from African swine fever. Does that have any effect on the production at all, or hasn't it affected here so much?
Yeah, definitely it has. What we see is that many countries have reduced their production, on one hand due to ASF, because farms have to close and a country is not able to export to third markets, to markets outside Europe. And the other hand, there was also the COVID-19. So all in all, it was leading to bad market circumstances and very low prices. And then the third factor is the increasing feed price. So this has become a perfect storm, so to say. And in many countries, we see producers quitting production. And the total production of pig meat in 2023 is likely to be some 5 or 6% lower than in last year.
I see. So we're talking about rosy opportunities in, for instance, Brazil, are also in the US, and in particular in China. There's always opportunities. The EU is not presenting that picture.
No, and we shouldn't. We should focus on ourselves. And I think we have a high level of requirement of demands from the consumers. So let's focus on ourselves, on our own market. That's sufficient.
I see. Now we're talking about the EU itself. As you said, it is a federation, so we've got various countries inside the EU. I think it's good to zoom into those in a little bit more, especially, for instance, into Spain, because in recent years Spain has risen to become the #1 pig producing country in the EU. How did they do that? What developments have been going on in recent years?
There are several factors in Spain. One of them is that they are highly integrated, so they have a very good supply chain cooperation, and that's in combination with a low cost of production. So they are quite efficient, and all in all, they do it very well in their terms of cost of production, and moreover, they have a good export base. So they were during some month they were the #1 exporter to China. the number one source for China. But now they are also facing societal problems. It's not that easy to become permissions to expand. There's also, well, some manure problems in some areas in Spain. To get employees, it's not easy. They become more expensive. Their buildings are very cheap, but now they also have to increase the quality of the buildings and to have higher investments there. Their export base is reduced since China is demanding less meat. And moreover, they are now hit by the Rosalia PRRS. And also there, as I told before, in the US, they have quite some mortality on many farms, and mortalities in 10, 20, 30% of the pigs dying. Well, this is not very good for such farms. But this also means that Spain as a country, I think, has now reached the top of production, and likely they will not grow further in the coming years, or only very limited level. So what we see, and that's the experience of 30 years, let's say, that many countries popped up. They are a top producer during a couple of years, and then well, they reduce, or at least they become stable, and that's it. And so this is also what we have seen in Spain before, some 15 years ago, and now we see it. Spain has been the top producer, cheap, etc., well organized, but now they are losing position.
Okay, so far for Spain, you mentioned the previous number one in the Netherlands, in Europe, was Germany, and how come that they lost their leading position, and where is Germany going at the moment?
Yeah, Germany has been the turntable, so to say, in Europe, in the European Union. It was the leading exporter. But it was a combination of factors, and one of them was the outbreak of African swine fever. So they lost their export position. The COVID-19 had a severe influence on their meat industry. That means the meat industry is not able to pay a sufficient price level actually to their farmers. So the farmers are losing money. The farmers have to deal with a new policy related to animal welfare. For pregnant sows, they have to be, no, sorry, for the insemination area, they have to have an area of 5 square meter. And also free farrowing is going to be the new situation in a couple of years. So especially sow farmers are now deciding not to continue their farm. And we see a reduction of animal numbers in Germany. Well, and in combination with the high feed prices, and many of the farmers are producing their own feed, and they can sell it also to others when there's a good price. So they decide not to feed it to the pigs, but just stop production. And a final issue is also that the consumption of pig meat is going down in Germany quite fast, more than in other countries. So also from the demand side, they have a difficulty. They are producing less and they are demanding less. And still, they try to survive. And it's not easy to be a pig farmer at this moment in Germany. So where will it go? They will be they will show a further shrink in their total production, in the total number of farms, at a higher cost of production, and a higher level of animal welfare at least.
But do you expect it to stabilize at some point, at a certain level?
Well, at some point, probably yes, but for now, I think we will see a further reduction of animal numbers in the coming few years.
Okay, we've spoken about Germany. Now let's move to Denmark. That is traditionally a strong and innovative country in swine production. Where does that country stand nowadays?
Well, Denmark is going ahead actually in the way it has done always, so focusing on a very high zootechnical performance. Yet there is a new focus on reducing piglet mortality, and also to invest in free farrowing. So Denmark is increasing the animal welfare level, so to say. And what we have seen is also a reduction in the pig numbers, mainly related to the fact that piglets could not be exported to Poland and other European destinations. So they were hit by a lacking demand of piglets. But in the end, they will continue to be a strong country and a leading country in the world.
Mhm. And talking about strong and leading countries, here in the Netherlands, we tend to see ourselves that way as well. What can you say about swine production in the Netherlands these days?
Well, definitely the pig production in the Netherlands will further reduce because there's a lot of political debate on how should we proceed with animal production anyhow, and my estimation would be that we will see some reduction of 20-30% of number of animals, pigs, as well as poultry and dairy, probably because of nature conservation and the so-called nitrogen policy, which is highly debated at this moment. Moreover, there will be an increasing level of animal welfare demand, especially the intact tails. We're highly focusing on getting this implemented by 2030. And also free farrowing will become a new standard sometime. We have no date yet set. So animal welfare and also environmental protection are very important elements at a lower level of production volume, let's say. And what this goes always, additional animal welfare and environmental protection hand in hand with increasing cost of production. And as long as retailers are paying for this, is not a problem. But when it comes to exporting to other European countries, this might be a real challenge.
I see. I see. Now we've spoken about the European Union in a certain level of detail. Now let's zoom out again. And well, we started talking about China, the US, Brazil, and now the EU. Each of these zones are differently organized. What could you say about the different supply chains? What kind of supply chains can we identify?
Well, there are different kind of supply chains, but what we see in many parts of the world is the vertical integration. So where it's maybe not ownership, but at least there's a contract between the partners in the supply chain, from the farmers and the processing, and sometimes even including retail. Sometimes including crop production for feed, or veterinarians, or breeding stock. So it depends, but in most parts of the world, the vertical integration is the common way of cooperation in the supply chain. Not so in Western Europe, for example. And this is also related to history. Farmers are not so much willing to give away their freedom of well, let's say entrepreneurship. At least this is how they feel. And there's maybe less demand for it, because the main reason why vertical integrations occur is because companies want to have sales security or supply security. Assume a meat processor, you have a meat processing plant, but you have no pigs. So you want to contract those pigs. And that is the basis for a vertical integration. So what we see in countries like the Netherlands, it is a cooperation based on historic ties. Farmers are selling their pigs to a slaughterhouse, but there's hardly any contract. And I think we will see an increasing degree of partnership. And at least this is also what I would wish, because partnerships means that you are sharing profits and losses, sharing the benefits of the entire supply chain, let's say. And as a whole, including the farmers and the feed producers, you can focus on what the consumers really want to see and want to have. So basically three kinds of supply chain cooperation: the vertical integration, the loosely coupled production like in Western Europe, and increasingly the partnership.
I see. And that's an interesting development. But I think, as you say, it's probably a necessary development. Now we have established a little bit what the swine industry looks like globally. Perhaps it's also time to see what it could mean for swine producers themselves. And for that, I would like to invite my colleague Iris Hofman to step in to look a little bit into the future. Iris, welcome.
Yes, welcome. Thank you, Vincent. It's good to be back again at this podcast. Nice to meet you as well, Robert. And I do have a couple of questions for you, especially looking at the prices of pig meat. They have fluctuated a lot the last couple of years. How can farmers survive this uncertainty?
Well, that's a good question. It is really a challenge for farmers to survive this because they are typically not able to bear such fluctuations. So now they have to look for opportunities to cooperate with other partners in the supply chain, for example. And that is also why I mentioned the partnership. So when farmers are cooperating with their, let's say, with the meat industry, they can share the risks, they can share the fluctuations in the prices. And when they also cooperate with the feed industry, on the other hand, they can have some cushioning of the price movements of the feed. So bear it jointly is easier than bear it all alone, the burden. A second option is to apply futures. And we're not very used to it in Europe, but it is in the US, for example, and also in China, we see there's a future market for pork. And this is a way to cushion price fluctuations as well. And a third, especially for Europe, is to withdraw from the world market influences by setting up own feed supply and sales, not as a commodity, but in a value-added program for dedicated consumers.
Yeah, and I do know that in the Netherlands, you see that a lot that people are working more with the chains and stuff. Do you see that in other countries as well? That is more upcoming.
Yeah, what we see in Northwestern Europe indeed is an increase in cooperation in supply chains, where farmers are cooperating with meat processors mainly. This is the typical approach, and meat processors have to provide meat according to a higher standard to their retailers, customers, and so they have to contract farmers to adjust their farm processes to have increased animal welfare, etc. So yes, that is what we see in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Denmark, in Finland, in the United Kingdom, in Belgium, in France, in Spain, so Austria. In many countries, we see this this development, let's say, to a further cooperation.
Yeah, but is there then still room for like family-owned farms, or more like bigger corporations like getting there, starting?
I think there's definitely room for family-owned farms. Because family-owned farms have advantages in terms of own labor and own capital supply. And this is very strong base. And that means that they can afford more fluctuations in the profits than companies could do. It's not only about resilience. It is also the eagerness of a farmer, of an entrepreneur to be the best and to produce the best level of production according to the lowest cost. And this is not per se the situation in a large company.
No, exactly. But what opportunities does the industry have to increase those pig prices then?
Well, that's all a matter of supply and demand. As always, this is the basic law in economy, let's say. Prices are set by the balance between supply and demand. So if we have higher cost of production due to higher demands, then the price has to increase. Otherwise, we have no producers. So we should reduce the total production in Europe, especially of the higher level produced pig meat. And then there's an increased balance. That's what we see in organic. The balance between supply and demand is better organized, is well organized. It means that they can have a good price level. Well, at this moment, it's not so good, but generally spoken, the price level is good enough and the farmers are able to make money.
So does that mean that we need more people eating pig meat or something, or is it?
Well,
more
I think this
difficult
will
than
not
that?
happen in Europe. It's rather a matter of reduction of consumption, but we should be willing to pay a little bit more for the meat.
Exactly. I think that is, if you have quality, people will pay more as well.
Right, agree.
Great. Thank you a lot. Those were my questions.
Welcome.
Thank you, Iris. Great to have your questions as well on this podcast. Having heard this all, I think it's about time to round off, but maybe we should let our listeners go with the question: how do you think that the world pig meat production will develop in the coming decades?
Interesting question. So I think the total production will further increase because pig meat consumption, and so the total production, is related to the economic situation. And what we see is that there is a further wealth increase especially in parts of the world like Asia and Africa. So the demand for pig meat is likely to grow. So the total production will grow, and this is also what we see historically, that there's a continuous increase. Where will it be produced? I think especially in South America and also in Africa. It has to be organized, and it will take some time, yes, definitely, but they have opportunity to produce more pig meat. It could be done over there. When it comes to Europe, I think we will eat less meat, and this is typically the pattern, that with increasing income, the total meat consumption is increasing, but at a certain level of wealth, then the total consumption is going down. And this is what happens in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And how about meat alternatives, for instance? Do you see a market for that?
I think meat alternatives will have some place, but it will not overtake real meat. As long as consumers really like the bite and the taste and the real meat, let's say, and they're producing it themselves in their own countries, and they know what is meat about and animals are about. In our countries, yes, in the high income countries, let's say, I see a place for alternatives. In the rest of the world, it's less.
I see. Thank you very much for those wise words. And now I'm trying to look at the clock, and I think we'll have to draw it to an end for this podcast. And I trust that our listeners now are completely up to date with where we stand in the world of swine production. So I'd like to thank you for being with us today at the Meet the Expert podcast series.
It was my pleasure.
Great. And as said, we will be back with a second episode in which Robert Hoste will also be our guest. And in that episode, we shall zoom in on the sustainable production and how to achieve that whilst remaining competitive. So make sure that not to miss that podcast. You'll be able to find it through all the regular podcast channels, as well as a Pig Progress website. Just search for the Meet the Expert podcast series by Pig Progress and Boehringer-Ingelheim Animal Health. For now, I thank you for listening. Thanks to Robert Hoste for being with us, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.